Hello once again, Chris Lee, Billy Derrick, and Joey Dwyer doing his best Luke White impersonation on the roundtable episode, election episode. We got new elected officials. Big Opavi is now president of the state of Alabama, as Billy pointed out. So that's our politics for the show, in case you wanted them. All
Best
right,
tweet of the night.
in all seriousness, we are brought to you by the Wash House. If you're dreading laundry day, if it is stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy, let the laundry professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you with two convenient locations in the greater Nashville area. Drop off your dirty laundry. Our professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of. That's your time. Within 24 hours, pick up your nicely folded, fresh, clean laundry ready to be put away. Check out washhouseclean.com. Stop in today and get your time back. We're going to talk basketball today. Again, Wash House is our basketball sponsorship. We, of course, got a lot of football to talk and probably no baseball today unless it comes up in the mailbag. But if it does, baseball content presented by the Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, a family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro. Partnership began 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee. They now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. They supply grocery stores, convenience stores, and others with purity products, as well as Mayfield, Nestle, Haagen-Dazs ice cream. For more information, visit their website at mpmci.com. Gentlemen, interesting time around Vanderbilt sports. Basketball season is underway. Vanderbilt got a 39-point win over University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Commodores go to Auburn and pull a 17-7 upset. South Carolina now on the horizon in what is a big, big game. Been an eventful week here. Let's start with Alabama. I know we've talked about on the channel a little bit Alabama, Auburn. I mean, I guess we could talk Alabama too, since that's part of it. But yeah, big game in the rearview mirror, Billy, and a big one coming up in a difficult matchup with South Carolina.
Yeah, this team's beat up, guys. We talked about it as a potential negative thing heading into Auburn, and even going back to like Ball State week. This team six game stretch here that and every team has it, right? But I'm really interested to see physically how they stand up against South Carolina. You saw Cedric Alexander. I think his status report tonight, actually, in the availability report, will be very interesting. He played, but didn't play a whole lot, really, against Auburn, Joey. And I think, but credit to Monty Jones. We got a question in the mailbag about him. I thought he ran better than expected. Gillespie as well. And Newberry, of course, who was lined up out wide, one of those plays at receiver and caught that touchdown. Health at running back will be interesting. And just really everywhere. Like physically, how can this team stand up? They've answered the question. I mean, the first challenge was that Auburn game, and that's a physical Auburn defense and Auburn offense that has hit explosive plays. Jarquez Hunter was coming off a monster performance against Kentucky, and Joey, I mean, you were there. They held them down to 50 yards. I mean, what a performance by the defense. Thought it was probably their best performance of the season. And look, you're not playing an Alabama type offense or a Tennessee, well, maybe not Tennessee this year, or an Ole Miss, an explosive offense. But Auburn has been explosive this year. I mean, they've scored more than 7 typically, and people don't want to give Vanderbilt's defense credit. Around the SEC, I think people are slowly starting to take notice, Joey, of that defense. But I mean, that's the talking point right now. Clark Lee's defense.
I think that was the most remarkable part of Saturday that kind of got swept under the rug. They only allowed 50 yards to the SEC's leading rusher, who went for 278 the week before. And we barely talked about it just because of the significance and the magnitude of that game. But that was a huge piece of it, and I think it's a real indicator that this thing, especially defensively, is moving in the right direction. You saw Nate Noel run for, 217 yards against them earlier in the year, and we were going, man, their run defense might be an issue. And then since then, it's just been almost lockdown, right? Texas ran for a little bit, but they really shut down Alabama. They shut down Jarquez Hunter on Saturday. I think that's a huge piece of this, and their defense is really taking a step forward. Clark Lee mentioned that they had been really hard on their defense throughout the year because they knew an effort like that was in there. And we saw on Saturday that they can do it. They've always had playmakers, but at times they've been a little bit shaky on that side of the ball. But Chris, Saturday, I think defensively they showed up, and I'm interested to see what they do against South Carolina, because I think that was an offense that we thought they could handle going into the year. But I would say that they've probably exceeded expectations externally throughout the early part of the season.
I'd have to go back and listen to it again, but Clark Lee made some sort of observation about, and this is my word and not his, maybe it was his word, but about adjustments being made starting with the second half of the Texas game. I remember they allowed Texas under 4 yards of play in the second half and really put the team in position to win. So I think defensive improvement is kind of being slept on. I think the other thing, and Clark Lee nailed it head on when I asked him, Billy, you were in the room. When you watched them play last week, it just was clear to me that Alexander and Pavia did not have the burst that they've had before. I don't know how you really fix that in a week. I think you make some adjustments. He talked about lowering the load in practice. I almost wonder, man, if it's me, I'm thinking about exerting Diego Pavia and Cedric Alexander absolutely as little as possible until Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
Just seeing if they can get healed, because that when Pavia loses that burst, that takes away so much of what they can do. You can see how their offensive numbers have started to really tumble in terms of points, yards per play. So it was kind of interesting, Billy, to hear Clark not dance around that at all in Tuesday's press conference.
Yeah, and back to the defense thing you talked about, I was really interested to see, like, what were the steps on this defensive side of the ball heading into Auburn, but really just the second half of the season that you guys took in order to have a performance like that against Jarquez Hunter in that running game and Thorne and those explosive plays. They held him to 7 points. And, he really went into detail about, well, we started getting calls in earlier. I started simplifying things. Longwell talked about after one of the games, I think it was the Texas game, they struggled early getting calls in. And I think Clark took that to heart, and he said, "Look, guys, I'm going to get this. My goal here, heading into Auburn and down the stretch of the season, get calls in as soon as possible, and to simplify things." And that's what they've done. If you look at the defense, on film in the Auburn, really in the second half of the Texas game, and then going back to a little bit of Ball State there, not as many crazy stunts. Before beginning of the season, like you go back and watch the Virginia Tech game, they did a lot defensively, and they're always going to do a lot with Fontenette, and but not a ton of, like, I think before the season, I thought Joey CJ Taylor would be a guy that would come in on a bunch of blitzes. Haven't seen a ton of that. Now we'll see some run blitzes, right, at times, and they have to do that. But Clark also talked about the challenge of we've got to be very calculated when we send those pressures. And so I think they've just simplified things. They have gotten to, before the season, Luke said the meat and potatoes of the strength and conditioning. I think they've done that defensively. And it usually helps when you're able to do that for 18 to 22-year-old kids. But back to your point on offense, Chris, Clark said we've got to find other ways to create space. We obviously it starts in the early downs, but they're going to have to get really creative. Stowers isn't always going to be open. A lot of times, especially these last 3 games, he's going to be bracketed. So again, I think Hoskins, like the receivers have to step up, whether it's Hoskins. Sherrill is a guy that at times, I don't think he's doubled a lot, Joey, but even Sherrill and Skinner, it's hard for them to create space. I thought they made some big catches. Skinner on that late one against Auburn, DJ Durkin and Hugh Freeze wanted a flag big time. I thought it could have been called there, but again, physical play late in the game when they needed it. So offensively is a little bit more of a work in progress in the defense right now, Joey. But I think that's a good thing. You got a good offensive staff that I'm sure will find ways against some really good defenses here down the stretch to have success.
I think we're really going to see what Tim Beck and Jerry Kill are made of down the stretch here, because I think, in a sense, the blueprint is out on the Vanderbilt offense, or at least it's perceived to be, to where you've got to keep Diego Pavia in the pocket, you bracket Stowers, and you make anybody else beat you, especially with Cedric Alexander hurt. You got to make Junior Sherrill make a play in space consistently. You got to see if Diego Pavia can make the 10-yard throw from the pocket without being able to step up or get out and roll. I think that's a really interesting thing to see. Can Tim Beck and Jerry Kill still scheme what they were trying to scheme early in the year now that teams kind of know what's coming? There wasn't a lot of tape out on Vanderbilt, or at least what they were going to do with their new personnel before the last couple of weeks. And now teams are coming in knowing what Vanderbilt's going to do. And I think it's going to be a really interesting perspective to see, man, how does Tim Beck adjust to teams kind of knowing how to beat Vanderbilt, knowing how to contain them. And you've seen it the last couple of weeks, right? Ball State kind of had the blueprint with Diego Pavia a little banged up. They didn't really do anything until Diego Pavia was kind of unlocked with his legs. Auburn scored 17 points. Kentucky, they didn't have a great outing. Even Texas, they scored 24 points, but you felt like the offense was a little bit of a rut throughout the day. I'm interested to see if there's another breakthrough offensive performance at some point, Chris. And it doesn't have to be a huge numbers day, but it's got to be, man, look at Tim Beck, look at Jerry Kill, because I think in the last couple of weeks, you've almost seen Clark Lee kind of outcoach the offensive staff.
Yeah. General thought, and I'm no offensive coordinator, but it feels to me like the things that they had in their bag of tricks, I don't know if they're being tried less or just being taken away, because I want to say, like, it feels like there's not as much in the way of motion and end arounds. But then I also remember some times where they've tried that and it just went nowhere. I think Stowers touched the ball once on a running play and got knocked, 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage. I don't know if it's a passing play coming up that. So to just say, hey, they're not being as creative, I don't know if that's fair, because I don't know what the defense is taking away from them, but it's an observation. There's some truth in there. So I think they've got to get to a bag of tricks. Like if there's something that's not been, that they've got in reserve that's not been tried, now is probably the time to do it, because I feel like the offense right now is sort of running on fumes. I think, Billy, you started the show maybe with the question about what does South Carolina have on offense. I think that's going to be a very interesting chess match, because Carolina is giving up sacks on nearly 14% of plays. Lenore Sellers is big. He's mobile. He's a headache to bring down. How much can you play and get a pass rush with just base coverage, and drop a lot of guys into coverage and maybe generate pressure that way, because Carolina's line is not very good. That whole chess match on defense, I'm going to be fascinated to see how that resolves on Saturday.
Yeah, South Carolina's offense has not been great statistically this season. You look at the rushing efficiency, they're toward the bottom in the conference. You look at their passing efficiency, toward the bottom of the conference. And so, but as of late, like, they had their best game against A&M, a really good, well-coached Mike Elko A&M defense. So I think the big question is, if South Carolina takes care of the football, is that all they have to be worried about in order to beat Vanderbilt? Like, can Vanderbilt beat the South Carolina team if both teams play a clean game? And that's not, I don't know that that's a given that both these teams play a clean game. I think I trust Vanderbilt out of maybe any team in the SEC to go out and play a clean football game with the way they've been playing in the last several weeks. But they've got physical players that can beat Vanderbilt. I mean, Rocket Sanders is a load to bring down. So is Lenora Sellers. They get that running game going. I think Vanderbilt could be in trouble. They've also got some good receivers that are physical that I think could give Vanderbilt some challenges. But guys, this defense is playing well. I mean, if they continue to do what they're doing, Carolina isn't all that much different than Auburn and what they want to do. Now, Auburn didn't have a mobile quarterback. If Peyton Thorne could run a little bit, I think that would have helped Auburn on Saturday. But Joey, this defense, again, I don't know that they need to change a ton, but they still got to force a turnover or two, I believe, in this game, and that's part of their formula, Joey. Like that's how they win these games, is forcing. Now, the fumble late from C.J. Taylor didn't. I guess you could argue it won the game, but it was already in doubt there. But this defense is playing well, Joey, and if they just keep doing what they're doing, I think they'll have some success in South Carolina. It's probably going to be low scoring, I would expect, though.
Yeah, we've walked by the turnover wall the last couple of weeks, and it hasn't looked much different. I think that's got to be the case. McGugan's turnover wall has to have a picture or two added this week, and I think Lenora Sellers' legs are another story to watch. I mean, they aren't that dissimilar from Auburn, but the difference there, right, is their quarterback can add another dimension to their offense, and that's what Vanderbilt's really got to be worried about. I also think they got to be worried about the South Carolina defense a little bit. They're fifth in the league in yards given up per game, one of the league's better defenses. And I think that's maybe what gives you some concern when you look at this matchup is just like, man, the Vanderbilt offense has already been sputtering. Now you see a pretty good defense, a defense that is pretty comparable to Auburn that held you to 17 points last week. So I'm a little worried about what the Vanderbilt offense can kind of scheme up. And we'll talk more. I think there was a question about how you can kind of scheme it up to be better than it has been. And we're not offensive coordinators, but it's got to be a little bit different. And I am a little concerned that with Diego Pavia banged up, with Cedric Alexander banged up, and maybe even Eli Stowers a little bit. He says he's good, but I wonder where his health is actually at. Everybody's a little bit banged up. I wonder if they're going to have to get some contributions from guys that they normally don't get as much from. Maybe this has to be the Junior Sherrill game, or maybe this has to be the Cole Spence game or the Quincy Skinner game, something along those lines, to where a guy who's already kind of in the mix has to be a little bit more in the mix, Chris.
Yeah, I'm concerned about health this week. I feel like, again, I use the phrase running on fumes. It's got that feel to it a little bit. I think you would love to have the bye week this week rather than next week, but that's not what the schedule dealt. And last point I'll make before I move us on to basketball, and then we will get to the mailbag. If I've got my facts correct here, LSU, South Carolina lost that game 36-33, lost the turnover battle 2-1. Ole Miss lost that game 27-3, lost the turnover battle 2-1. Lost to Alabama 27-25, lost the turnover battle 4-2. Every other game that South Carolina has played, it has been either even in or ahead of in the turnover battle. The one time Carolina was even was Akron. They won that 50-7. I think the three of us and our brothers would have had a shot at Akron. They're a bad team. So I think, I don't know that football is always that simple, but in this case, maybe it is. Big key.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, when they beat Oklahoma 35-9, they were 4-0 in turnovers in their favor.
I told you that yesterday, Chris. I think, and I'm sure you agree, Joe. I think it might be that simple. Whoever wins the turnover battle, just because of how low scoring we probably expect it to be, you win the turnover battle on Saturday, I think you win the game.
Yeah, and back to the Akron thing, I think Billy's brothers could definitely put up a chance. That's my comment.
Especially one of your brothers.
Yeah, however many of the 9.
Yeah, I don't think I could play. I don't think I could play all 4 quarters though.
Well, we slow the game down and try to take the tempo out of it. So
if Tim Beck is our offensive coordinator, maybe.
Yeah, right. Basketball. Let's go there before we go to the mailbag. Joey, let's start with you. You guys have already given a lot of your thoughts, and I have not, because I've not done a video component of this since opening night. But that was just kind of a fun night to be in Memorial Gym, and to be real about it. Maryland Eastern Shore is maybe a bottom 5 team in college basketball. I think they're next to last in Ken Pom nationally today, a rebuilding roster. But I felt like you saw proof of concept and something in the way of a product that's potentially going to be a whole lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that was the big takeaway for me on that night. Vanderbilt was far from perfect. I think their defense needs some real work, as Brandon wrote about. But offensively, I think they're fun. They shot 23.5% from 3 and still won the game by a lot, still scored 100 points. I think that's a huge testament to just their pace, and maybe that they have a couple different dimensions. Maryland Eastern Shore doesn't have as much size as some of the teams they'll see, but they've also got 5 guys over 6'8". I don't think Maryland Eastern Shore is as awful as maybe the numbers think they are. I think there's a lot of people who are educated on that league that think they're an upper half team in that league. We'll see, but they did beat VMI in a secret scrimmage, which take that for what it's worth. I think Vanderbilt, though, a lot of fun. And that's kind of the theme of the season. I don't know if they're going to be a tournament team. I don't know what it looks like when AJ Hoggard comes back, probably a little bit better. But they're going to be a lot of fun, and I think that'll probably be a staple throughout the Mark Byington tenure, is that it's just going to be a way more enjoyable product to see. I think another thing worth noting, and we talked about it a little bit on the rapid reaction, they only had 1 turnover, and Mark Byington, when Chris asked him, said he doubts that one of his teams has done that over the years. I think there's very few SEC teams that have even done that in a game, and perhaps most importantly, they did it without AJ Hoggard, who's their primary ball handler, their best passer. That's just such a huge thing for me. AJ Hogarth's return on Sunday, I think, will be a real story. But for now, even without him, I think they took care of business in a way that this program has not over the last few years, Billy.
First time they've hit 100 since 2018, which we had to do a lot of searching up in the crow's nest for that for a little bit. Most points. Yeah, shout out to Brandon. Most points scored in a coaching debut at Vanderbilt, which, there's been some pretty good basketball coaches on West End. Second most points in a Vanderbilt season opener. And McLaughlin, I mean, what a performance. 10 of 10 from the field, school record. All kinds of historic numbers thrown around. I don't think you can ignore that. And, again, it's Maryland Eastern Shore. I think you make a good point, Chris. Really intrigued to see. The next first test, probably that Cal game you expect from this team.
Yeah.
SEMO is going to be a better test for this team on Sunday. But you put up 102 against anybody, you're doing something right offensively. And they did scuffle for a little bit of that first half. But even the defense tightened up in the second half as well. That's going to be key for this team. Can they guard? You're playing in the SEC. There's some high scoring teams in the SEC as well. Like Vanderbilt's not putting up 102 is not an outlier. You're just kind of right there in the middle. I wonder if they're able to separate from the bottom of the pack. We'll see. But these non-conference games are big to continue to improve defensively. Because I don't think we're going to be worried much about this offense, and that's good to be able to say through one game of the season. Defense, we'll see, but I mean that was encouraging, very encouraging, and already drastically different tempo than what we saw really in the last 5 years under Stack.
An interesting thing about the offense, I don't think it looked exactly like we thought it would look. I mean, I think we would have thought they would have hit more threes and maybe a higher percentage. Well, certainly a higher percentage of them. So I think there was that. But I think one thing that just struck me as the night went on, and you guys saw it too, how easy their twos were. I mean, they had so many dunks and layups that were almost uncontested. Now, again, some of that is who they played, and I've gone back and compiled the stats for every single SEC team, what their players did last year, either at their current stops or at the stop before. Do you know who had the best assist to turnover ratio by its roster by a wide margin?
Had to be Vandy with Huffman and Hogarth.
The one we're covering. They had a team assist to turnover ratio of 1.7, which is outstanding as a team. And they did that the other night without the guy that I think most people believe is their best point guard. And I mean, the whole roster of point guards thing, I mean, we've had our fun with that, and it is pretty funny. It was really funny to see them announce 5 point guards over the PA as Chris Freeman did the other night. At some point it becomes a little bit of a punchline, but there's, all joking aside, there's maybe a little bit of something to that. And that might be a way that they can, because I think they're definitely going to be talent disadvantaged in the paint. And I think there's some nights that they're going to get shredded defensively, but they are so good with the ball from so many places that I will be interested to see. I think that's going to make them tough to defend. And I think that's probably going to win them some games in which they'll be underdogs.
I look at Jalen Carey as kind of an example of the point guard thing that you mentioned, maybe having some fruit to it. I look at Monday night as an indicator of that. I mean, Jalen Carey had a really nice post move to start the game, and he bruised a little bit too. He got some offensive rebounds, and they really killed Maryland Eastern Shore on the offensive glass. But also, I think the indicators to me are Jalen Carey, when Vanderbilt had surrendered a 9-0 run, Jalen Carey takes the ball and goes and gets fouled. I mean, I think he got it from the top of the key and took it in. And then also they were in a little bit of a scoring rut, and Jalen Carey takes it coast to coast and gets fouled. And then you look at that, you look at his really nice pass from the mid post to find McLaughlin. I think there's a lot more to his game than being a back to the basket guy. And I think that gives him another dimension when they get to SEC play and they're a little outmatched in the front court, to where your big man can go have it at the top of the key and find another big man, or he can take it himself to the paint, or he can pop out and shoot a three. Byington said earlier in the year that he wants Carey to take, I think, 2 or 3 threes a game. And then Carey didn't take a 3 that game, but he still kind of showed that he's multidimensional. Billy, though, I think what I look at with the defense, and maybe this is the only thing that gives me encouragement there besides positional size, is that I do think they have a roster full of guys that want to guard and don't just say they want to guard, because there was a lot of guys on last year's team who said defense was important to them, and I don't necessarily think it was, but you look at everybody individually, and I don't think there's anybody who you pick out and say, man, he's just a dreadful defender, right? I was a little worried about that with Tyler Tanner, and he really got after it. I thought he was really good defensively on Monday night. MJ Collins, I thought was a really good point of attack defender. Chris Magnon, I think, is a better defender than people will think. So overall, I'm a little worried about their defense, maybe more than a little bit worried. But I think they've got a lot of guys who take pride in it and want to defend. And that's the first step of this.
I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, guys, but this team has the traits to be dangerous.
Interesting.
And to be dangerous, to be interesting, to be fun. And they got up and down the floor, but it's not just one or two guys you're talking about. I mean, I got to think, you mentioned Tyler Tanner. Looked really good. I mean, that's a really nice college debut for that kid. I think he's going to be really good at Vanderbilt. Jalen Carey, I mean, bringing the ball up the court, spin move, and putting it in. Like, Vanderbilt hasn't had a player like that in a long time. And they're old. They're deep. Like, there's some makings of a team that can be very interesting. Now, you're playing in a really good conference, probably the best conference. So I'm very interested, and they're hungry. You talked about that. You know, that was the theme at Media Days, Joey. You know, they're old, they're hungry, they want to make the tournament, and they want to put themselves in the NBA, like Hogard has talked about. I'm with you on the defense, but I think their style counteracts that well. Like, if they were a slow team, I'd be concerned because you're good luck slowing it down in the SEC against, you know, Alabama and those other teams. But at the end of the day, Chris, they're deep, and I was encouraged by what I saw on Monday. Can they be consistent with it? And can they avoid the big letdown loss that really hurt a lot of Stackhouse's teams? I'll be interested to see that as well.
Yeah, Kajani Wright also a piece that would be really valuable on this team potentially.
Yep.
Maybe above and beyond what he has been in the past, just because of the makeup of this roster. Billy, I'm going to have you go ahead and get the mailbag ready. While we're doing that, it is a busy time here at Vandy Sports. We're in the middle of football and basketball season overlap. I've got a busy life, a part of that, taking care of a wife, kids, aging parents. There are days where it is overwhelming, not much downtime. I don't need stress, distractions, and energy to get in my way. A good way to get out of that trap is Magic Mind. The nice people at Magic Mind reached out to me a few months ago, said sample their product. It is designed to help with those things, stress and focus. Guess what it has? It is a mental performance shot that keeps you clear and motivated and reduces stress. It has given me a clear head and much needed focus through some stressful and hectic days this spring and summer. It's not a coffee replacement. There are no quick fixes, but it's an addition to your morning routine with time-release caffeine. If you want the scientific explanation, here you go. Completely safe, 12 all-natural ingredients to support your body's energy engine. Mushroom nootropics, adaptogens, 100% of your daily vitamin C and D in every bottle. Doctor validated with over 200 scientific studies. Magic Mind donates a nickel of every bottle sold to mental health charities to help U.S. homeless communities. So confident it'll help you that it'll give you 100% of your money back. No questions asked if you don't like it. Go to magicmind.com/Vandy Sports. Enter the promo code Vandy Sports 20. That gets you 20% off a one-time purchase, 48% off a subscription. You can find this in our episode description, the link, the code, all those things. Anyway, Magic Mind. Try it today. You'll find that flow state awaits you. Billy, let's jump into the mailbag. Where do we lead off?
G-Barks 24. How does South Carolina's offense compare to the other SEC teams Vandy has played this year? And are there any areas Vandy can attack? Well, that's a good question. I think, first off, South Carolina has the best defensive line Vanderbilt has seen so far. South Carolina might have the best defensive line in the SEC, maybe in the country. They've got a freshman who is a freak. They've got and they don't send pressures a lot. They get pressure. They've gotten plenty of sacks by sending just 4 guys. So, and we saw Texas and that defensive line really affect Vanderbilt. This Carolina defensive line is better. So, you saw how this offense sort of got caved in and caged against Texas, South Carolina is going to be able to do that and more. So that's how they compare physically up front on defense. The rest of the defense is solid, but their defensive line is the unit that stands out. Offensively, I don't think they're much different. I don't think they're all that much different than Auburn. I don't think they're all that much different than Kentucky. They're better than Kentucky, of course, but nothing, maybe not nothing, but there's not a ton that scares you offensively. Now, the way they played Saturday night against A&M, that scares you, but they haven't been that consistent. That's been maybe not an outlier, Joey, but the team against A&M has not been the South Carolina team we've seen all season. But offensively, I'd say they compare similarly to teams Vanderbilt has seen. But that defensive line is, they're going to cause some havoc because they've caused havoc against everybody.
Yeah, and they've seen some good defensive lines throughout the year. I think Cedric Alexander not being 100% or even close to it, I think is going to be a real factor in terms of the run game, and Diego Pavia not being effective as well could be a thing if he's not healthy. They've got to really have Monty Jones do something. They've got to have AJ Newberry do something. I think Newberry catching that go route was really interesting to me. I think that's been a great use of personnel by Tim Beck and Jerry Kill, is getting him on the perimeter and letting him run deep routes and allow him to be a deep threat. But man, I just worry a little bit about them continuing to see physical teams up front and them being banged up front. And their line is pretty healthy to this point, which I think is a big thing. But just over and over again, they're getting beat up front. And the last couple of weeks, they haven't necessarily had the same burst offensively. They haven't had the same numbers in the run game particularly. Chris, I'm a little worried that Vanderbilt's going to have to go win this game with its downfield passing game. And I don't know that it's had to do that a whole lot throughout the year. It did a little bit against Kentucky. There were some nice plays against Auburn, but Diego Pavia still had 8 or 9 passes in a row on Saturday that were incomplete. So my takeaway here is I think they might have to win it a little bit with the downfield passing game, and I'm not sure that that's a recipe for success for them.
Yeah, the downhill passing game has not been good the last 2 games. They went 2 entire quarters without a completed pass and still beat Auburn, and Pavia threw 2 picks against Texas, which is he's thrown 3 all year. Again, there's signs all over the place that this thing is kind of running out of a little bit of gas, and the defense has bailed them out. They've got to find something a little different. I mean, this could be the one game that you could see that it kind of really goes sideways on them if a break or 2 early doesn't go their way. Now, I'm not saying they can't win because, boy, if you've made that bet all year, you have paid for it if you bet against them. But there's some warning signs here in this one.
J2M, what can Vandy do to generate more offense against South Carolina? Are there personnel changes that we could see Saturday on offense? I mean, I don't think there's personnel changes, but I like that you mentioned Newberry, Joey. That's an element. We need to see that again Saturday. Now, again, South Carolina saw it too, and I'm sure they see Newberry out wide. They're going to start keeping an eye on him. But Stephen Hubbard after the game made a really interesting comment, and I think Pavia was in on it too. Pavia sees Newberry one-on-one, he's getting the ball. And Newberry told that to Pavia. He said, hey, if I'm one-on-one outside, give me the football. So I think Newberry could be the key down the stretch. He's a different type of back than Cedric Alexander, but to be able to line him up at receiver is something that Vanderbilt can do, I think, to generate more offense. We're not OCs, but that's why Beck and Kill get paid the big bucks to find out answers for this. Joey, that's a tough answer. I mean, I think I like Newberry as a guy that they can utilize a little bit more. I think you're going to have to see, specifically in this game, you might need a Richie Hoskins touchdown, like you saw against Kentucky, to where the defense doesn't expect it. But Pavia's got to have time too. That's another concern. So that's my stab at it, getting Newberry the ball more and lining him up at receiver. I think doing that another 2-3 times against South Carolina when they maybe don't expect it could generate more offense for Vandy.
Yeah, I think he's one of those guys that you got to get in quick space. And that's one of the things that I look at and say maybe that's a recipe for this team is, like Texas did, getting your speed guys in one-on-ones on the perimeter and allowing them to make a move and get some yards after the catch. But I just don't know that they have enough guys who can do that consistently. I think Tristan Brown is maybe a guy who you see on the field a little bit more. If that's kind of the recipe, I think that's a guy who can make people miss in space and is really fast. But AJ Newberry is one of those guys that has to be able to make a play in space on Saturday. It's Junior Sherrill is probably one of those guys. I think Eli Stowers is going to be a guy who they look to utilize heavily, but I think South Carolina knows that. And to take some of the pressure off that, they've got to find some other guys and be able to find them downfield. I don't think the recipe for Vanderbilt is throwing 10-plus yard passes every other play. I think if they want to have a downfield passing game, a lot of it's got to come from quick space like Steve Sarkisian did a few weeks ago. And Chris, I think that's really my only stab at it. Maybe get Cole Spence more involved in the receiving game as well, because I think that's something that I'm kind of expecting to happen at some point throughout the year, but the time's kind of running out based off just the way the season has gone. But if you look at fall camp, there's certainly something in there.
Well, look, we and I don't think it was mostly mean-spirited. We caught a lot of criticism because we said during fall camp, hey, the offense doesn't look good. And then we got to the season, and boy, did it look different the first half of the season. And I don't think I've ever had a time in my professional career where what I said was going on in practice and what you saw the first 6 weeks were so disjointed. But I do think now, as maybe people have seen this a little bit, whatever the case is, and you're seeing the scoring go way down, and they're struggling to get to 300 yards of total offense. I mean, it's been, let me pull this up. Total offensive yards working backwards now. 232 against Auburn, 269 against Texas, 420 against Ball State, 288 against Kentucky. So they've been 288 or under 3 of the last 4 games. That's not generally a sustainable formula. I remember saying in fall camp, hey, they're really good at getting 2, 3, 4 yards a run, but not much more than that. And the way that they've done it in the season is Pavia. Guys, they're running up against, and again, I'm not saying they can't continue to win games, but they're running up against now kind of what we saw in fall camp. The defense knew what it was coming. They don't have some explosive option just sitting there in mothballs. I know people have asked about Cardenas. I mean, I barely saw him in fall camp. Maybe he was getting a lot of reps when you guys were there, but the days I was there, he was not. This is what they have. You've seen it. Now it's up to them to find it, to unlock better production going forward, but your options are very limited, and they are all right in front of you.
You also wonder about Bryson Coleman, because you haven't seen a ton of him. I mean, again,
yeah,
I
he's
could
also
be totally
not
wrong.
Back.
Right. But in terms of generating more offense, at the receiver position, could he be a guy that emerges a play or two down the stretch here? Again, I don't know that you want to throw a freshman out there on the road in Baton Rouge in a big spot, or, against Tennessee or South Carolina, but just like they need something like that. You need another layer to this offense that emerges, whether it's Coleman, Spence, Newberry. Feel like they need something else. Okay. Let's go with Forever Gold. Luke, you said you weren't going to predict more, and I know Luke isn't on here, but Luke, you said you weren't going to predict more than 6 wins until we got 6 wins, so you wouldn't jinx it. What's your prediction win total now? We'll answer that question. We'll get Luke's answer maybe down the road, but win total prediction, guys. How many wins does Vanderbilt get, Joey?
That's a great question. I would say, you know what? I think they go 2-1. I think they beat South Carolina and they beat Tennessee, which is just absurd to say, but I don't see why they can't do it at this point. I think LSU is going to be really hard to beat on the road, but if Vanderbilt does what it's done, I mean, I don't see why they can't do that. And maybe that's a little bit of an optimistic prediction, and I sound crazy saying that they're going to beat Tennessee, but I mean, they just don't scare me a whole lot. I mean, I think their offense has some flaws. I think they're a good team. I think their defensive line is really scary and is better than anything Vanderbilt's seen this year. But, Chris, I'm going to go 2-1, and maybe that's a little bit optimistic considering what the offense has done. But at this point, I have a hard time betting against this group. And you would have been crazy to say they beat Alabama or they would go beat Auburn at Jordan-Hare, but they did it. And as a result, I'm not going to count them out of anything at this point.
I'm going to go 8, but that's going to include the bowl game, because I think they're going to get in a bowl game. They're going to be playing somebody. If they're 7-5, they're not getting sent to Orlando and playing, Indiana or Penn State or whatever team just misses the college football playoff. It's going to be my guess is they get a lower tier bowl, and it's going to be an ACC or somebody like that squeaked in at 6-6 and 7-5, and they'll be very motivated to play in a bowl game. So that means basically I think they're going to win one out of their last three. I'm not sure who it is. I kind of feel like Tennessee is their best matchup. You've got a bye week between now and then. You do play LSU the week before. And watch LSU. If LSU gets beat this weekend by Alabama, LSU doesn't have a playoff to play for. And you could see, I mean, there's so many variables. I don't feel very optimistic about them winning 2 out of 3. But the season is told. I mean, we're sitting here in November. Their worst loss is 4 points to Georgia State. Like, I can see the thing running out of gas, but they've also hit the accelerator hard enough that they can maybe, coast on what's on fumes for a little bit. This team is gritty. It is tough. It found a way to win at Auburn when everything it did to win games was taken away, and they still did it. No, maybe that was Auburn being Auburn too. That's part of it. But I feel like 8's the right answer. But boy, even looking at that, I'm going that's not going to be an easy climb to get there.
Mm-hmm.
No, but I mean, it wasn't easy against Alabama. It wasn't easy on the road in Lexington.
But they were all healthier and more. It was still a little bit more of a novelty at that point than it is right now.
Right. This team just finds ways. They find ways. They willed it to happen at Auburn, and that was really impressive. Whether Auburn was Auburn or not, whether Hugh Freeze is Hugh Freeze or not, that's hard to beat a coach 3 years in a row. Diego Pavia did it, and I think that's a big reason why I'm with you, Joe. I think they get to 8. I don't think it's going to be pretty. But I think this team is built of something that no other Vanderbilt football team in my lifetime has been built of, and it's a mentality. It's that mentality to win whoever you're playing. Again, LSU, that's going to be tough, but maybe that's the game. Maybe they beat LSU and then beat Tennessee, but fail to beat South Carolina. This team has been hard to predict all season, but I'll go 8. I think this team gets to 8, and then maybe even 9 in a bowl game. Okay. Farida's boss. Dear podcast team, is there a chance that Vandy fans buy up more than 50% of the tickets at the bank and have a home field advantage this Saturday? I think there is. And it's because of the opponent, South Carolina. It's also because of the potential weather. It's also because of, it's not always easy for that road fan base to, or even pleasing for them to, want to come to First Bank Stadium. And it's not, not going to call it a construction zone anymore, but I do think there is a little bit of a appeal some appeal that's been lost. But South Carolina's hot. There's going to be a lot of Gamecock fans there, but it's already sold out. I think because of the opponent, and this isn't a Texas or an Oklahoma, Chris, that hasn't ever been in Asheville before, for a trip to the SEC. I do still think there's going to be a lot of Gamecocks in there. But yeah, I'll say I think there's a shot.
Yeah, I think there's a shot. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't have much of an idea either. And I do think it's a tough ticket. Isn't it sold out now? I think that was announced just before we got on. But I wonder how much of that is Vanderbilt fans still. I don't think South Carolina fans, with the way they've performed this year, were super motivated before this weekend. But I'm curious to see now that they go and beat A&M the way they did, that I wonder if more people travel now as a result of that. But short answer, I think there's a chance. I just don't have much of a feel on it.
Columbia, South Carolina, 7-hour drive, so not too bad. Okay, OG 706. What can Tim Beck do to stop South Carolina's defensive ends from creating havoc like they did to Texas A&M? Good question. Obviously, Cedric Alexander, guys, has been a really good blocker, pass blocker. I mean, he's a physical player. Monty Jones at times has been as well. Tight ends are going to be big. We talked about that with Stowers. He said, pass blocking is paramount against South Carolina. Spence has been phenomenal in the run blocking game. Pass blocking, I think he's been fine in that, but I've really noticed the run blocking as well. But Pavia's got to have some time. I think it's up to the tight ends on the edges to help. It's on the running backs and point blank offensive line. Big week for Chris Kalakis in that unit. I think they can prove a lot on Saturday. We haven't always talked glowingly about that offensive line. They're confident. They call it the union. I mean, Clark Lee called Kalakis the best offensive line coach in the country. Big week for them, big opportunity for them to show what they're made of. And I'll keep it simple, Chris. The offensive line. You got to play the game of the season if you're the offensive line up front and protect Pavia, because if you do that, I think you win the game.
Well, I'm not a play caller, never will be, but common sense tells me the quarterback draw might be a nice little weapon to have in your back pocket Saturday.
And the screen, Joey, you go back to the Texas game, and the TV cameras actually showed Tim Beck's reaction to the screen call. Cedric got tripped up there by Castillo, I think. Beck was not happy. That can't happen. You've got to be laser focused when you have a screen opportunity and you've got green grass in front. If you're the running back or you're Pavia or you're an offensive lineman, you've got to execute. That's big. The screen game and the draw game, like Chris talked about.
Yeah, quick space. Like we talked about earlier, that's the way to negate a tremendous pass rush is quick space. And I'm going to look for Vanderbilt to do that a lot. When they are dropping back, I think Cole Spence is going to be a factor. He's talked about earlier in the year, I think it was last week, he views himself as part of the offensive line in a sense, and he views himself as part of the union. So that is something to watch too. I wonder how much he's kind of chipping guys and how much Monty Jones is back there doing that as well. I think him and Chase Gillespie could be utilized as pass blockers a little bit. But, yeah, I think a lot of it's going to come from quick space, like you said, Billy.
Guys, I think it might be time for a little bit more Chase Gillespie, to be honest. I thought in fall camp, I thought he was the most – and I wouldn't have never expected this, but I thought he had maybe as much explosiveness, which this is a low-ceiling explosive running back room. But I think at times he's felt like he's had the most ability of anybody – who they play to break off a run of, 8, 10, 12 yards. So that might be a thing to watch too.
Yeah, and he's ran well in his chances. You do have Alexander. You don't want to take too many carries away from him, but if he's not healthy, Gillespie's that option. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't seem, for whatever reason, to trust AJ Newberry with a lot of carries. I don't know what that means, but just look at the game logs.
I think a lot of the path for AJ Newberry to be a real factor is through the short passing game. And I think that might be a better path to him than running him between the tackles. I think if you're going to run some between the tackles, it should be Monty Jones or Chase Gillespie. And guys, the legend of Chase Gillespie in the second fall camp scrimmage, I think, lives on to this point.
What a performance.
What a performance.
Colombiano Door, why haven't Joseph McVay and Tristan Brown seen the field more when we so clearly have a talent problem at that position? Are they so behind in blocking? Look, they're freshmen. There's always something, with freshmen, with running backs, a lot of times they can't pass protect. You got to be able to pass protect. I would assume they've struggled in blocking. That would be my guess. We saw a little bit of McVay against Auburn. We saw the touchdown at Missouri. We haven't seen it really much at all of Tristan Brown other than his one catch against Alcorn State.
Oh, that was pretty.
I don't know. Yeah, it was. But that's a good question because I thought you would see more of them, guys. But the way they use receivers is different. I mean, it's not a drop back offense, and where they look at 3 or 4 different receivers on every play. There's a unique design within this offense that they just, the way they use receivers is different. But it is probably whether it's blocking, not understanding a concept within a play. Like there's always something. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure it's something, within their practice performance and their mental ability.
Billy, I don't know the answer to this, but I would guess the odds that any of those guys were asked to pull off blocking assignments in a high school offense that resemble anything they're going to be asked to do in this one are probably pretty slim. Here's the other thing. Other than the Ball State game, I think the receivers have been a pretty pleasant surprise. I mean, they have made almost all the reasonable plays asked of them. In your list of concerns about this team, not giving more reps to freshman receivers, to me, feels like that's way down my list of concerns.
Well, and Joey, another thing to remember, this offensive staff did not recruit McVay and Tristan Brown. And I'm not saying that's a reason, but I think that's something to remember.
Yeah, I think I attribute this largely to scheme. The reason a guy like Loic Fungie's getting on the field so much is because of his body. He can block, and he doesn't have to get targets to be really valuable. He's really valuable on special teams as well. I think these two guys at this stage of their development have to probably be getting targets to be really valuable. I do think, and I don't know exactly if this is correct, but if I'm correct, Tristan Brown's already played in 5 games. So I think the red shirt is off the table, but I'm not 100% on that. So if that's the case, he should be on the field a lot the rest of the way. And I think McVay, the red shirt's still in play, so I wonder about that. But I'm not 100% sure on either of that. But I could have sworn Brown has been snapped in 5 games. So, but I do think it's largely attributed to the scheme. I think a lot of the time when the receivers are on the field, they're not looking for them to catch balls, Billy. I think they're looking for them to be decoys and be run blockers, and even in some cases just be bodies out there. And I think that's why Loic Fungie and Darian Wiley are on the field more than those two guys.
Billy, I'm going to give you a little bit more scientific answer here, and then we need to do rapid fire round with these last couple because I've got another show to do. Okay. But okay, I'm looking at this. Vanderbilt has had on average 63 snaps a game. 61% of the time they're in running plays, and it might be even more than that.
That's your answer.
Well, it might be a little, because some of these I take sacks out of it. There may be some times where passing plays were called.
Right.
They turned into running plays and they weren't. So it may be a little less. But here's the thing, okay? So that's roughly what, 25 passing plays a game. I mean, I would think you're going to target Eli Stowers. At least 7 or 8 of those. You're probably going to target Cheryl 5
Skinner.
or 6 of those. You're probably going to target Skinner 4 or 5 of those, maybe an occasional Cole Spence target or one to Hoskins. Like you run out of opportunities. So I don't know what's left on the leftovers there for a freshman. And at that point, you got to say, all right, this guy's better and deserves to see the field more than a Skinner or a Cheryl or somebody. I'm just not sure that's the case.
Yeah, you and Joey made good points. Scheme. I think scheme is a big part of that. Okay, rapid fire here. One-word answers for these last few questions, guys. Colombiano Door, who's your favorite amongst the discussed transfer targets to replace Diego Pavia next year? I'll go with John Mateer from Washington State.
Seems right.
Yeah, I'm not there yet. Nobody's in the portal yet. I'll comment in a few months. It was Ty Simpson at this point last year, and he's still on Alabama.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right.
Way too premature.
Yeah. How confident are you that Vanderbilt can translate the season's success into momentum on the recruiting trail and the transfer market to help them succeed after Pavia leaves? I'm confident, but I'm not over the moon confident. That's what I'll say, Joe.
I would say pretty confident. I mean, I look at the guys that are here every weekend. I'm pretty confident that they can translate it. To what extent, I'm not sure. Are they going to have a top 5 recruiting class in the league? No, but I think they could be a lot better than they've had in the past, especially 2 years down the line. Maybe not this year.
I think they have a chance. To give you a truthful answer with details would take a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that's not necessarily rapid fire built.
No.
Okay, G-Barks24, with Alexander banged up and Monty Jones hurt, is there any chance we see Cardenas get some carries? We talked about that earlier. I doubt it. We just haven't really seen him much this year. Midge's VU, looks like Luke is going to be an absentee. You already touched on that, Luke, or Chris. And then let's see, rain in the forecast for Saturday. Does it favor one team or the other?
No idea.
I don't know. I mean, I think I want to say Vandy, but that's hard to tell.
They have such a great team.
I'll give you the answer that supports that favor in Vandy. Lenore Sellers at one point led the country in fumbles.
He's been sloppy. Yeah.
So you throw in a wet ball and a line that struggles to protect him. I mean, Pavi
And
has been around,
a
put
lot
a
of
lot more
reads.
ball. I don't know how much it rained in New Mexico, but I'm betting he's played a few games in the rain. My short, if you had to make me answer, I would say it favors Vandy, but who knows?
Yeah, I would think in favor of Vandy, but also South Carolina's defensive line is pretty scary. And if Cedric Alexander may be banged up, Diego Pavi may be banged up, that could hurt you a little bit on the ground, but that's what you need to do in the rain.
All right. Let's see. Last one. Clark Lee's defense now ranks 30th in the country in points per game allowed. Last season, they ranked 129th out of 133. That's unbelievable improvement. How have they done it? We touched on this a little bit earlier, guys. He's gotten calls in earlier. They've simplified things, but he's the DC. I mean, Clark Lee is the leader of this defense, whereas Nick Howell was last year, and that's a drastic difference. And they've got better players. You've got a guy like Brandon Fontenette who has come in and wreaked havoc. CJ Taylor's playing a different position. Guys, that is unbelievable improvement. I actually haven't thought about that a ton.
Yeah, two answers for me. I think the talent is they upgraded it in the portal. I think that Brandon Fontenette has been tremendous. I mean, that kid may be an All-American by the time he leaves here. They didn't have one of him a year ago. Corday Sidner, been a big help. Just lots of guys here at the Glenn Seabrooks has helped them at times. A lot of guys who have played a role. And the other thing, Nick Howell ran what I called the Dixie Chicks defense. There were just wide open spaces everywhere you looked. It was more than
That's
talent.
An awesome comparison.
I mean, but how many times this year, like you do not see, like other than the Virginia Tech play that where they lost the lead and had to come back, there have not been many snaps this year where you look up and like they left a whole swath of the field open, either through bad angles or bad scheme. Like that got cut down to a remarkable degree this year.
I think for me, money. I mean, they have poured so much money into the defense, especially throughout the offseason, and then Clark Lee becoming the defensive coordinator has been a huge thing. I think there's a lot more nuanced takes to it, but the resources they poured into the defense are really helpful for them. Clark Lee taking over and, like you said, them getting the calls in quicker, things along those lines. They've really beefed up the defensive line, which has made everything else better. And Billy, that's the simple of it, but we could, again, do a whole 10-minute spiel about that.
Yeah. I think Steiner, too, those defensive linemen look a lot different than they did last year. And, really everybody does. But I think that contributes to the defensive improvement as well. And that'll do it, Chris.
Yeah, thank you to everybody for watching. Forgot to give a shout out to our mailbag sponsors, Sutherland and Belk. If you need a personal injury attorney, Taylor or Russell, call them 615-846-6200. Hopefully you never need one. If you do, they are the guys that you want to go to. Wonderful human beings. John Levin, good friend of the show, Wobble Bond Dickinson. They thank the student athletes at Vanderbilt for their dedication, work, and effort. And Yeaman Packaging Systems, leaders in end-of-line packaging automation. Thank you also to Wash House and Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company. Always looking for sponsors. That is how I pay these two guys in the video with me is through sponsorships. And that's how we keep this going. chrislee70@gmail.com if you want to help there. All right, that's a wrap on today. We'll be back with more content later this week at vandysports.com and everywhere you get your podcasts and your YouTube stuff will be there. Thanks for watching and listening. This has been the Vandy Sports Podcast.